a report on devastating impacts the House GOP budget proposal would have on American families. These are not abstract issues. These hurt real people, and they hurt them a lot. First, I want to thank our amazing DPCC leader, Deb Stabenow, for her incredible work in helping put this report together, which is not just important to our caucus, but for our country, to learn, understand, and actually humanize what the GOP proposal would do to their lives. These things are not abstract. They hurt, and they hurt real. And this is the great report that Senator Stabenow has put together. And let me tell you some of the things that would happen if the GOP's proposal went into effect. First, 21,000 law enforcement officers would be eliminated nationwide, hurting American security. 1 million babies access to formula would be denied because of the cuts of WIC benefits. 1 million babies not getting their formula. This is not some abstract exercise. This is real pain. It would slash $582 million from opioid epidemic funding. We have a lot of our Republican friends complaining about the lack of good help with opioids. We're doing a lot. We've done a lot in the last year. But now they want to cut $582 million from that. It would cut $950 million in CDBG grants, which help pay for law enforcement, public service, strengthen communities. So many of our middle-sized and smaller communities depend on CBDG, gone. $472 million from LIHEAP. In a state like mine, like Sheldon's, like Debbie's, you would like? Not so much. It's nice and warm and, yeah, all right. Anyway, all of our states, yes. I've been in the lowlands and Whidbey Island where she lives. Anyway, it would, $472 million from LIHEAP. Senior citizens in particular depend on this money. $108 million from VA medical research for our nation's heroes. There's so much that's done, as this report demonstrates. 3,000 CBP border agents and $640 million in border security. We hear a lot from the other side about border security on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they want to slash it. It just doesn't add up. Now, this isn't a massive surprise. Right out of the gate, MAGA Republicans in the House showed their true colors by voting to benefit rich corporations over hardworking Americans. But I have to admit, these cuts are awful and even worse than you would think. In other words, when you hear they're going to make cuts, people like us who've been around a while, they say, oh, these are going to be bad. But when you actually do the numbers, as this report does, you see how devastating, how awful they are. So the report makes it very clear, the difference between MAGA Republicans and Democrats. I'm proud of that difference. We want to help our veterans, support feeding our children, support our seniors, keep people secure, while the MAGA GOP schemes ways to benefit wealthy tax cheats under the guise of reducing the deficit. That's all they care about. They don't care if they hurt infants. They don't care if they hurt average folks. As long as they can tell their rich friends they're cutting government spending so they can cut their taxes once again. It's just gross. Democrats are fighting for families. We'll continue to shed light on the radical MAGA agenda that hurts Americans, and we're not stopping anytime soon. You're going to hear more from us and more from us and more from us about how bad these cuts are. And that's why they're having such trouble putting together, showing us actually what the cuts would be in deficit reduction, because maybe even some of their more mainstream members would never tolerate cuts like this. Senator Stabenow. Whoops. Well, it says the next speaker, Senator Blackburn.
Yeah.
I guess she's not here, and I'll call on Senator Stabenow.
Yes. Well, thank you, Senator Schumer. And let me first set the backdrop here, because our country is seeing the most robust economic turnaround in a generation. Coming from a manufacturing state, we have a true manufacturing renaissance going on, bringing jobs home. It's very exciting. Wages are up. Unemployment is as low as it's been in 50 years. 50 years. And 12 million new jobs are being created, most of them by small businesses. So, what does the Republican Party want to do? What does the House Republican plan do? Destroy the economy. Destroy the economy that is now coming back. The first bill they passed when they took control was to protect wealthy tax cheats. They like to say they're worried about the deficit. 25% was created during the Trump years of all the deficit ever in the country, by the way. But the reality is that what they passed would increase the deficit by $114 billion. Next goal is now passing a brutal set of budget cuts that would hurt every family. If, in fact, they make the decision not to do it across the board, not to cut defense, it's a 30% cut in everything affecting people from healthcare, education, nutrition, veterans, law enforcement, and so on. Slashing healthcare for seniors, people with disabilities, low-income families, cutting crucial funding to repair our crumbling roads and bridges, just as we're now getting started to really rebuild America. And they would defund the police by eliminating 21,000 law enforcement positions nationwide. And as Senator Schumer said, denying 1 million babies access to formula, reducing affordable child care when we know it is critical to have so many of our workers get back to work that child care is a critical piece of this. Ripping support away from veterans and undermining our ability to compete against China while compromising our national security. The bottom line of this, and again, this is their plan. This is what Speaker McCarthy promised in order to, after 15 votes, become Speaker of the House, that he was going to take it back to 2022 budget levels. That's what this does. And the bottom line is they would lead to brutal budget cuts that would leave Americans stretched thinner, our economy weaker, and our country less safe. This is bad for America, and we strongly oppose it.
Senator Murray.
Thank you.
Well, we have heard a lot of talk from the House Republicans about cutting spending, but very few specifics. And that's probably because the specifics are actually pretty bad. This report makes clear that when House Republicans throw out ideas like going back to 22 funding levels, which Speaker McCarthy and MAGA Republicans in the House want to do, they aren't actually proposing a freeze. They are calling for drastic, draconian cuts that will hurt families in every corner of this country, undermine our economy, jeopardize our national security, and limit our future. It is a raw deal for you and your family to make sure Speaker McCarthy can appease the most extreme Republicans in the House. When House Republicans talk about cutting spending, they aren't just cutting some abstract number or a line on a page. They are talking about massive cuts to countless programs that help people in countless ways every single day. They're talking about cutting health care services. They're talking about cutting child care, which is already too hard to find or afford. They're talking about cutting the programs to make sure our kids have the very bottom line basics, a healthy lunch, clean drinking water, high quality public education, a bright future, and making sure your families have the basics, keeping roofs over your families' heads, or keeping the heat on in winter, or keeping food on the table. That is what House Republicans want to cut back, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's the 988 suicide lifeline that has helped millions of people. There's border security that is stopping fentanyl and drug trafficking. There's research into cancer and Alzheimer's and other awful diseases. There is investments in our workforce, in science and in technology, so we can stay ahead of China. That's what House Republicans want to cut. That's what government spending means to my friends and my neighbors and my constituents back in Washington State. It may just be a vague number to out-of-touch House Republicans, but to the American people, it's meaningful presence in their daily lives. And I should know what government spending is. My family would not have made it after my dad, who was a World War II veteran who served his country and made a living for his family running a small little store on Main Street of Bothell, Washington, when he got sick with multiple sclerosis and couldn't work anymore. I was young, but he got care thanks to our VA. We ate thanks to food stamps. My mom, who suddenly had to provide for 7 kids, got a better job thanks to federal workforce training. Every one of me and my 6 brothers and sisters went to college because of federal grants. We made it through very tough times because our country did not say tough luck. But now the Speaker wants to cut the funding for your kids' school lunch, the Pell Grant to help you get a degree, the child care you rely on to go to work, and that is not common sense. It is reckless and it is heartless. And we will leave kids and families behind if we go down that road. This is not going to happen on our watch. Cutting opportunities, cutting support, cutting public safety, that is simply not what people back home sent me here to do. They want us to solve problems. They want us to make their lives better. They want us to make it a little bit easier for people who are struggling to make ends meet. They want us to invest in our families and in our communities and in a brighter future. So here's my message to House Republicans. No one wants chaos. None of your constituents want to have to worry about the wreck that you will do to our economy by threatening not to pay this country's bills. No one wants to worry about a default and not getting their Social Security check. Do the responsible thing. Raise the debt ceiling in a bipartisan way like we always have, and let's work together to fund the government. No chaos, no drama. Let's go to work.
Senator Murray's head of our Appropriations Committee, and Senator Whitehouse is head of our Budget Committee.
Thank you, Chuck. Republicans have a little arithmetic problem. When you add up the cuts they want to make, they're so extreme that they don't want to show them to you. So they use non-arithmetic terms like 2022 levels. This is why they won't disclose their cuts, not here and not in their extremist debt limit threats. They apparently haven't even been able to get agreement among Republicans. It's so MAGA extreme. If Republicans do as many promise and protect defense spending, again a non-arithmetic term, the cuts elsewhere could surge as high as 30%. So they won't tell you that. The arithmetic is devastating for them. So we did a little bit of it for all of you. Cuts like $472 million from LIHEAP, which Rhode Islanders know is a horrible idea. Cuts like $582 million from opioid epidemic funding, which is the Democratic author of the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, I know, and all of you know, is a rotten idea. And all of this is supposedly to deal with a national debt that they deliberately made worse with massive revenue losses because they lowered tax rates for their corporate and billionaire friends and donors. They were happy when billion-dollar corporations paid 0 federal income taxes and even fought us when we fixed that. We like to say these Republican tax cuts for billionaires weren't paid for in the budget sense. But of course they were paid for, with tens of millions of dollars in political spending for Republicans, much of it just as hidden as the arithmetic Republicans won't share with you today. Thank you.
Ready for questions on this subject? Yes.
So, would you support giving the White House the ability to raise the debt limit on its own, such as what Senator Markley is proposing? And then second question, the Congressional Budget Office put out a report today saying that if the current fiscal path stays the same over the next 5 years, we'll reach a record in national debt. What is your proposal for solving that?
Well, you've seen what we've done already. In the IRA, we actually cut the deficit by $300 billion. For every dollar we spent, we put $1 into deficit reduction, unlike our Republican friends who just did huge tax cuts for the ultra-rich, for the billionaire corporations, and increased the deficit by close to $2 billion.
say they don't have a plan, you're basing it on their 2022 plan. Have you had any conversations with Speaker McCarthy? And at what stage are you ready to have those conversations?
Well, look, Speaker McCarthy is feeling the pressure from our proposal, show us your plan. So this week he said he's going to get a whole bunch of his Republicans together and see if he can pass something that has 218 votes. Here's the problem. The deep, deep cuts that the MAGA Republicans want, which probably even exceed the cuts that are over here, will probably not be tolerated by some of the mainstream Republicans. When one of the leading Republicans, I believe it was Granger, said, let's cut food stamps, several other Republicans said, I'm not voting for that. So they're in a real pickle, because the deep, deep cuts that some of them want will probably not be acceptable to others. And this shows you a sampling of that, but it's probably even worse than that in their budget negotiations. Yes?
So House Republicans are still saying for the most part they won't drastically reduce defense spending, but they are starting to float some potential Pentagon cuts with things like maybe base realignment and closure, procurement reform. Is there any room for cooperation there?
Look, when it comes to paying our debts, we think we should pay them free and clear of any hostage taking, any brinksmanship. We should do what we've done in the past on a bipartisan basis, come up with a plan that pays our debts without brinksmanship, without hostage taking, without saying only if I get ABC. Usually, at least as past as prologue, the party that is demanding certain changes before they reduce the deficit, before they pay our debts, loses. That's been the lesson of history. Because the American people don't want those kind of games. They don't want those kind of shenanigans. They know how dangerous they are. Yes.
On the debt limit, Congresswoman Spanberger said last week that she believes that defaulting on the debt poses a far greater threat than the Chinese spy balloon that they flew across the country last year, and also the 3 UFOs that were shot down over North America in the last week. Do you agree with that assessment, that defaulting on debt?
Look, I'm not going to make a comparison, but defaulting on the debt would be devastating. It would raise interest rates dramatically. It would have our retirees, whether they be Social Security or veterans or people who have their 401ks and their pensions, dramatically lose savings. It would cost them, on average, the cost of buying a new home $100,000. So that's devastating. Now, obviously, we have to make sure, and our military and our intelligence services are making sure we're safe when it comes to these balloons. We have to do both. Yes.
You and other Democrats sort of mentioned a lot about Social Security and Medicare. I was wondering if you share the same concern about Medicaid.
Well, I do. I think we do. It's just that Republicans have focused on Social Security and Medicare as the big entitlements. We believe Medicaid does a great deal. It helps poor people. It also helps a lot of very middle-class people as well. So it's a very popular program, and we would defend it. We don't think any cuts on Medicaid, just like cuts on Medicare and Social Security, should be attached to debt ceiling in terms of brinksmanship. Yes?
Social Security and Medicare do have some long-term issues with solvency. When and how do Democrats think that should?
Well, that's an issue that should be separate from debt ceiling. We believe we want to preserve. We don't want to cut benefits. We don't want to privatize. We don't want to do the kinds of things that Republicans have talked about in that area. And we have some plans to make it solvent, which you'll hear from down the road. Okay? Thank you, everybody.